Hello everyone, in this video we are going to see for each directive and iterator in case of loop in LWC, and in case of conditional rendering we are going to see LWC if, elseif and else. So if you want to see more videos on LWC, we have a dedicated playlist for LWC, so you can go check out in our channel, and all the videos are quite detailed. So what is conditional rendering? So suppose you have some property in JavaScript file in the LWC, and you, based on some condition, if whether the property value is true or false, based on some condition you want to display the element on the HTML component, or basically on the UI. So for that we use LWC if, elseif and LWC else directive, right? We are going to see that in the demo as well, but before that, you might have some question like what are directive, right? So directive are some kind of special HTML attribute that we add on the tag, right? So that is what is called as the directive. Like in this case, LWC colon if is a special attribute. This is what we call as attribute. So this we use in case of conditional rendering. For loop we have another directive which we are going to talk about it in the later section of this video, but that is for each directive which we use in case of loop. So I hope directive is clear. But before moving on to LWC if directive, Salesforce in LWC previously they have used if colon true and if colon false directive. So these are no longer recommended by Salesforce because these are going to deprecate in the future. So better don't use this anymore. If you already using it, you need to replace it with LWC if, elseif and else. And in this video we are going to see why the old one was having many disadvantages than the new one which we have. Moving on to demo, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to create a new LWC component. Go here, I'll name it as loop and rendering. Okay, and we also need to expose it in order to show it on the UI. Okay, so let's go on to the JS file. Here I'm first going to create some variables which I called it as rendering properties, and let's say expression is one variable, expression1, let's give it some default value, and expression2 we have, let's have it a default value, right? Okay, so based on these two variables we want to show the elements on the UI, right? So it could be anything. These are just for example. Let's go back to our HTML file. So on the HTML file, let's create lightning card first. So for writing LWC if else, we need to write first template tag, and then we need to write the directive, which is the first one is LWC if, right? And give it the first expression that we have. So if this is true, we are going to show something on the UI. Statement 1, let's say hi there. Okay, let's create another directive which is the elseif, and give the expression as expression2. We'll name it as statement 2 hello, and then on the third let's give it as template LWC else. In else we don't need to pass any property. You don't need to write any expression or property there, and you just have to write statement else, right? Let's save it and deploy it. So what will happen is, let's save this one as well. I think it is not saved. Okay, so now let's try to understand what is going on here. So if the statement first is true, LWC if is true, right, then first statement will get visible on the UI, and these two statement, which is else if and else, will not checked, right, if the first one is true. If first one is false, then we have to check the other one. If the other one is satisfying the condition, if the expression 2 is true, then this statement will show on the UI, right? And if both of them is false, the last one will get displayed on the UI. So out of these three, only one will always display on the UI. No two statement or no three statement will display on the UI. Only one will display on the UI. The other thing you need to know is you can write many else if condition here. So if you have some other property which you want to check, you can write else if condition below this one as well, right? And you can write it many times as you want, right? So I have written only one times the else if condition. You can write it multiple times. And also one thing you need to notice is, like, these else if and else is optional, right? If you only need else if condition, you can write it pretty easily. You don't need to write else if and else if, those are not needed, right? So let's go on the UI, try to add this component on the UI and see how it is showing on the UI. Go to edit page, search for our element, loop and rendering, add it here. Okay, so this is our component. Here it is saying statement else. So why statements else ran? Because if you check in our JS component, both the expression is false. So when it goes to else, the first statement, it will be false. So it will check on the else if. The expression 2 is also false. That's why it went into the else template, right? What will happen if I make the first one as true? Try to think what will happen. The first statement it will check and this expression 1 is true. So only the first component will get visible on the UI. So let's deploy it. And we can see statement 1 on the UI. You can see here the statement 1 is there, right? If you make both of them as true, what will happen? In this case also, the statement 1 will be displayed on the UI, because this first template is going to check first, right? If the expression 1 is itself coming as true, it will be displayed on the UI no matter what is the expression 2, because that we are checking in the else if, right? If you want to show the other statement, let's make the first one as false, right? So in case first one is false, it checks the first one, LWC if it is false, so it will check, it will go on the else if, and it will see that expression 2 is true. So in that case, the statement 2 will get displayed on the UI. You can see statement 2 here, right? So this is the basic example where we can set value on the properties, and based on that we are displaying the elements on the UI. So this is basic example. You might get different requirement, but the basic thing how this conditional rendering work is this one only, right? Okay, let's go back to our presentation. So the question is, why LWC if else directive is better than the old one, which is if true and false. And I know I haven't taught you what is if true and false, and that is also not needed because these will be deprecated in future. But the reason is chaining if true and false blocks was a pain and resulted in property getting called multiple times. So let's see with the help of an example. So if we want to build the same thing, the thing which we implemented here, we want to build the same thing by using if true, if false directive, right? Then how we are going to write it? Let's create another lightning card we need to write template if true expression one. So here I have written the same thing which we have built using LWC if, elseif and else by using if true and false. If the first condition is true, we'll see statement 1 in the UI. If the first one is false, for that we need to write again if false. Then we'll again have to check if the, in case of first one is false, we need to check if the second one is expression is true. So in that case we'll show the hello, right? If the first is false and the second is also false, so we'll say the statement else. So you can see like here it is more clear and understandable, but in this case chaining is quite difficult, right? Because here we don't have something called else if and else, so the chaining is quite difficult here. And you can also see the properties are getting called multiple times. Here expression 1 is only called once, expression 2 is only called once, but here you can see expression 1 is called twice, right? Let's save it and deploy it on the UI. So we will see both of these statement on the UI. Okay, refresh the page. Okay, so you can see statement 2 that is coming from the first LWC if that we are using, and this one is coming from when we have used if true if else directive, right? So you can see the result are same in both the cases, but the number of lines used on the other one is more, and also it is not too much clear to read, and first one is quite clear to read. So if I go back to our presentation, you can see that chaining if true false blocks was a pain and resulted in property getting called multiple times. So I hope you understand that, because the expression 1 is getting called 2 times in the second scenario where we are using if true if else block, right? Now moving on to the rendering lists in LWC, what it is, let's suppose so basically we use for each directive in case of loop, and also iterator in case of rendering the loop on the UI, right? So we'll also see the difference, which one to use more often and which one we can avoid. Okay, the question is, I'm sorry, what's going on? What is this loop and all? So let's understand it with the help of an example. If you have a list of object on JavaScript, right, or you fetch records from Apex, we are going to see the demo of both of this and wanted to show it on the UI. That's where we need to use loop in HTML file, right? So you can see here we have the list 1, 2 and 3, we have the name here. So how we are going to display that on the UI if you have the data on the JS file? So starting from for each directive, we have on the HTML we need to write for each directive with template tag, and we have to give the object which is the which can be the list of object or list of record which we fetch from Apex. And for each item we need to give a name. So you need to write for colon item, and you have to give name. Here we have given contact, but we can give any name like CONC, right? So that we are going to use when we fetch the value from this item, right? And then so inside of it we also need to write a key attribute, and why this key is needed we are going to see that as well. And here we have the contact dot name to fetch the name, contact dot email to fetch the email, right? And on the JS file you can see we have the list of object. The first one is the first object, the other one is the second object, and the third one is the last one, right? So key is basically mandatory, right, whenever you are using for each directive. The reason is it helps LWC to identify which items have changed. So let's say you have list of 3 items, and in the JS file if if the third item name is getting changed. So LWC will identify that only the third item is getting changed. So for that the key is mandatory and key has to be unique, right? It also improves performance in case of rendering that element on the UI if you did any changes on it. And also it has to be a string, right? So key has to be string and it has to be unique for each item. So in this case we have used contact.id as a unique key, right? Because id is unique for each item. Here you can see first one has one, second one has second, and third is third, right? So that's why key is important. So we are going to see the demo. So in the demo we have the array of object on the JS file and we are going to display that on the UI by writing code in HTML. So let's go switch back to VS Code again. Okay, so I'm writing the code here only. I'll comment everything for the rendering part. And by the way, you can find all the code in the source code in the description as well. Let's create lightning card again. In the JS file also I'll comment everything out. First create a list of objects. Okay, so we have created the list of object here. So this one is the first object, the other one is the second object, and the last one is the third object, right? It all has different attributes like ID, name, and email, right? So this one we want to display on the UI by using the loop, right? Because we need to use loop in order to display that on the UI. So let's go back to HTML file. Here what we have to do, we have to write the template tag first and then for each directive. So in the for each directive we need to use the same name where we have the list of contacts, right? So we are going to use the same name. Okay, and then you have to write for item directive. So here you need to give the name of each item, right? So you can give C, right, or contact, anything you can give. So let's give it con here, right? So this whenever we want to fetch item of that fetch items from the list, we are using con.name, con.value. That way we can fetch the value of the items, right? Then we have to use key attribute, right? So you can write div or you can write any tag, but you need to include key as well here. So doesn't matter which tag you are using, you can use div key as well, but you have to give something which is unique. So what is unique for the first item, second item, third item? The ID value is unique, name is also unique, but there might be possibility like name can be same for 2%, but the ID will always be unique, right? So you can write con.id, or even in case of email you can also write, because email will also be unique for each person, right? So we have written con.id as the key attribute, and then inside that we can put the value like con.id hyphen con.name hyphen con.email. So this one will be visible on the UI for each contact in the list. So let's save it and let's deploy it here. Okay, so we have some issue here. Okay, we need to use the track property. Okay, yeah, so we have defined it using track, so we need to write it here as well. Okay, refresh the page. Okay, so here you can see list of items what we have on the JavaScript file. You have the ID, name, and the email. So that way you can use the loop in order to display the elements, items which is in the format of list or array. You can display it on the UI, right? So this is one example where we have used the loop. The other example could be if we fetch list of record by using wire for decorator you can check my previous videos how to use decorator, but we can fetch data from Apex like list of account records, and we can show that on the UI as well. So let's do that. Let's comment these property here right now. Let's comment this one as well. Okay. So now we are using wire property here to fetch the account records from the Salesforce or the Apex class. If you want to know the format and syntax what we need to use, you can check my previous videos on decorators. That is quite detailed as well, right? So get accounts, we need to use it on the import as well. So account controller is a Apex class, and get accounts is a method on that Apex class. If I open that class account controller and get accounts, so it will give me the ID and name of all the account which we have on the Salesforce, right? Okay, so if we get the data, we'll store it in the account list. Else if error, if we have any error, will display on the console. Right, and we also need to define account list. Let's save these two files. Okay, we need to write file here in HTML as well. We have the lightning card. We'll again write template for each. This time we are storing list of contact in the account list. If you see, we are assigning account list as data. So in the template for each we need to write account list, and for each item I'm giving name as, let's say, ACC for one account. Okay, then again we have to write basically the same thing here which we have. Let's copy this and paste it here, but instead of ACC we have now con, we have now ACC. We have ACC.id and id hyphen ACC.name. Let's save it and deploy it. So now what we have done is we have fetched the all the accounts ID and name from the Apex controller that we have, the Apex class, and we are storing on the account list, and we are looping through this account list on the HTML component. So for that we have written in for each, we have given the list of accounts which we have from the Apex controller, and for each item we have given name. So let's say we have 5 accounts, so for first time the ACC will be the first account, the second time when the loop run the ACC will be the second item, and for each item we have a unique key which is mandatory in case of for each directive, and this has to be unique, so we have passed ACC.id, right? ID we have passed, right? And then we will display this thing on the UI. So it's taking some time to deploy. Let's deploy it again. Okay, it has failed because, okay, so again we did the same mistake. We have to write wire here as well because we are using wire decorator. It is deployed. Let's go back to UI and refresh the page. Okay, so now you can see we have all the list of account that we have in Salesforce. We have the ID and the name. So right? So that is how we can use loop in LWC. Let's go back to our presentation. So we have seen the demo one where we had the list of array and we display it on the UI. In the demo 2 we had fetch it from the Apex using wire, and then the account whatever we get from the Apex class we are displaying it on the UI, right? The next thing which we can use for looping in LWC is the iterator, right? Let's see how the syntax look like. So in case of iterator, we need to write this attribute with template, which is iterator :it, right? And then we have to give the list name, right? And here also keys needed for the same reason why it needed in case of the for each directive, right? But the main difference of iterator is if you want to do something when the first element is fetched out of that list and for last element, right? So you can control the first and the last element here. So that is the only difference in case of iterator. If you want to do something for the first element and if you want to do something for the last element, you need to use iterator. So if you see LWC, if we can write, this is the conditional rendering which we have seen, right? So it dot first will check if this is the first element or not. So basically if it is the first element, this whole statement will be true, and the last is it dot last. It will basically check if the last element is true or not, this element is the last one or not. So if it is true, this will do the thing which is written inside that tag, right? So on the JS file we have again the list of object. So we are going to see the demo, and we are also going to compare which one to use when, right? You have for each directive also for loop and iterator directive also for loop. So you need to identify which one is most recommended and widely used. Let's go back to the demo. For this I am again commenting out everything here. Okay, so on the JS file we only need the same thing like contacts, and we are looping through it, right? Okay, so for this one we have to again write lightning card, and then we have to write template. For iterator we need to write iterator :it. We have to give the name of the property which contains the list, which is the contacts. Okay. And here we again need to give the key. So in case of iterator, we have not given for item, which we have given for case of for each, right? To show each item in the list. But in case of iterator, it dot value is the item name, right? It is by default, you cannot control it, right? It dot value, and for giving key as unique, we can give it dot value dot id, because id is the unique thing in this object, right? Okay, and then we can show the value as it dot value is the first item, and then we want to fetch the id of it, and then we can give it dot value again the first item, and then we have the name of it. So we can also give email, it dot value dot email. So you can see every time we have to write it dot value, right? In case of for each, you don't have to write value, right? Here you just need to write acc.id, acc.name, con.id, con.name. But in case of iterator, just remember that it dot value is the element, right? And then if you want to fetch properties of that element like id, name, you have to write dot and the name. So likewise you can deploy it to Salesforce now. Okay, now it is deployed to the UI. Let's refresh the page. Okay, so now you can see the list of these three objects, right? So this is similar to for each directive which we have seen. So but what is the difference with the for each directive is you can control the first element and the last element in case of iterator. So if the first element of that list is called, we can control the UI, and the last element is called, we can control the UI, right? So let's see with the help of example. We can write, let's say we have written a p tag here and we have to write LWC if. Okay, so now see it dot first. So what it dot first return is, if it is the first element of the list, this value will become true, right? And we have seen LWC if, right, in the previous part of this video. So this is getting true, and we can write it something like the first element starts from here. So this component will only run in case of the first element, right? Because this part will get true in case of first element only. And similarly, we can fetch the last element and we can control the UI based on that. For that we need to use it dot last, right? This was the last element. Let's save it and deploy it. It is deployed. Let's see it on the UI. Okay, you can see you are saying this first element starts from here, and then we have the list of all the elements, and the last statement will get executed in case of last element, and it is showing us this was the last element. So we are controlling the UI based on the first element and the last element. You cannot control it in case of any middle element, that you cannot do with iterator and even with for each. But in case of iterator, what you can do is you can control the first and the last element. Based on that, you can control the UI element. Is that right? So how the execution is going, suppose you have on the list of contact, we have 3 items. When the first item is rendering, it will check this statement and this first line will get printed, right? Because it is the first element, and then the value of the first element is printed, and this last statement will get skipped because this is the first element, not the last one. In case of when it is rendering the second item, this statement will be false. Only the second item will be printed and the last one is also not printed. When the last element is rendering, first will be false, this last element will be printed, and this statement will be printed as well because this is currently the last item. Hence we have these kind of result on the UI. Okay, now let's go back to our presentation. The question is when to use for each directive and when to use iterator. As we have seen, these all are basically used for looping. As we have seen that these both directives are used for looping on the LWC component, but the question is when to use it. So we have this table. So for simple looping, we can use for each and iterator, right? Both we can use. For better readability, we can use for each because it is easier to see code in for each directive when we are using. For performance, again the for each is minimal and it is more efficient. The access of first and last element, if you want to need, you cannot use it on the for each, but you can do it on the iterator as we have seen in our demo. Most commonly used for each. So in 90% of the scenario you can do things with for each, and in some cases only you need iterator. I never used it personally in any of my projects, but mostly you are going to use the for each directive for looping. So master that one first, and then you can go ahead and explore the iterator as well. So that is the end of the video. If you like this video, do like it and subscribe to our channel, and you can check the other LWC videos in our playlist. Hope you have a good day, and bye, take care.